Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another Sigma Life Hangout. Today we're here with the director of PRIO, Mr. Tzimitras, and we're discussing a feasible versus a wishful solution. Hello and welcome.
Very nice to be with you.
First of all, what is PRIO?
PRIO stands as an acronym for the Peace Research Institute Oslo. And this, I'm going to say without any shame now, is the premier peace research institute in the world. You know, Norway has always had a very long tradition, if you like, of peaceful research, of engagement in activities to promote peace around the world. And this is the institution that anchors, if you like, all this. It's been around in Norway since the late 1950s and in Cyprus since the late 1990s, through an initiative at the time to promote peace at the wake of the accession, if you like, to the European Union, in a place that would be the only one joining the EU with an active conflict on its ground. But it's the only office that PRIO has outside of Norway. And it does
that
indeed.
Has its meaning as well.
Correct. Well, back at the time, of course, we're talking about nearly 20 years ago. Things were slightly different. Unfortunately, things are not very different in the sense that it's still a member of the European Union with a very active conflict on its ground. But I think it signified at the time the wish to start doing something outside the box, if you like.
And what does PRIO actually do? What's the cause of it existing in Cyprus? Is it to do research? Is it to do groundwork? What does it do exactly?
It's very much like PRIO's work outside Cyprus, if you like, where it might not have a physical presence as such, but a very active engagement in a number of parts of the world. PRIO promotes a public dialogue on issues here, in particular issues pertaining to the Cyprus issue, but broadly construed, if you like. So even Cyprus within a region, or how would perhaps regional realities affect the Cyprus issue as such. So in a sense, it promotes a very distant, very objective, if you like, public understanding, and facilitates public dialogue on such issues through research and policy planning, if you like. Forming a bridge in many respects between political elites and the publics that, in the case of Cyprus, of course, are going to be called in a referendum to decide themselves. So the active role of the public is something that we promote both in Cyprus, but use Cyprus as an example for other parts of the world as well.
You called on objectivity. How is that obtained in a society where we have two conflicting communities that participate in the same program?
Correct. And in a sense, part of the problem is exactly the fact that we now have the luxury, quote unquote, of having a dormant conflict since 1974. It's wonderful that only 8 people have perished in the buffer zone since that, in 41 years. At the same time, you could say that, of course, it's the failure of the international community in allowing such a division for 41 years. Having said that, the problem remains, and at the end of the day, the fact that we have a conflict spanning this long, or even 50 years, if you say things from the standpoint of the Turkish Cypriots, then obviously what this has allowed in turn to be done is for two very different conflicting rhetorics to be established, official national rhetorics, if you like, which have grown roots, have established themselves very, very well. And now they're so mutually exclusive that it's extremely difficult to bring together people to have a sort of bridging third understanding of things. And this is what we strive to do through the dissemination of absolutely objective scientific information, if you like, for the people to make the choice themselves.
So it's going to be an educated choice?
Hopefully so, yes.
Right,
it's certainly an educated information provided.
We're not discussing the rightfulness of any choice, but we want people to make an educated choice based on scientific and correct facts, as correct as possible.
Exactly.
And that brings me to my main question.
Yeah.
You spoke of two very distinct rhetorics between the two communities.
Right.
So I think it's safe to say that we have two very different ideas of what a solution is. And that means we have two different wishing the ideal of a solution. And now we need to tone it down and bring it into a feasible solution. So how far apart are the two, the wishful and the feasible?
That I think has to do with two things. One, at the political elites level, and to what degree are they committed, if you like, to seeing things under such a prism? And then at the second level, if you like, how do we communicate this to the people for themselves to understand the distinction that you very rightly point out? I think this, at the end of the day, is a matter of responsible political leadership. Because, of course, back in the Annan Plan, if you like, back in 2004, experience shows that responsible political leadership was not always the case on both sides, of course, at times. So in this respect, I think it is the people to make this choice. They need to be aware of where exactly things stand, what is feasible, what has been agreed on the ground by the leaders, unless we go back to square one where everything goes. I do hear political parties on both sides challenging the logic of the solution proposed, but this would equate itself to scrapping 40 years of negotiations, 40 years that produced perhaps not a wonderful negotiations, not a perfect plan, far from it perhaps, but still it's the outcome of exactly that. 40 years of trying to bridge proposals from both sides.
But for some others that means 40 years of failure. Maybe we need to start over to succeed.
Right. But if we start over to succeed and it has taken us 40 years to reach this stage, I would hate to think of the possibility of another 40 years starting from scratch for something else. That's one thing. The second thing is that international realities have changed. And they do change, thankfully. It's a dynamic system. But I don't think we can take things for granted as they were until today. For instance, the active engagement of international powers, the sustained, if you like, interest of the international community, welcome as it might be, at times should not be taken for granted. I think we do tend sometimes to take it for granted. The active involvement of certain states or organizations, the European Union and all that. And depending on where one stands, of course, all these individual states or organizations are being seen under a very different prism of facilitating or promoting a certain solution versus another one locally based and all that. The fact remains that realism needs to be absolutely in place. Pragmatism, I think, is the only way forward in understanding the international realities, in understanding the regional realities and priorities of states, and the Cyprus issue needs to be located, if you like, within such a change in understanding.
See, I grew up, I'm part of the generation that grew up with elementary books having as their book covers, do not forget,
Right.
all refugees go home, no Turks in Cyprus, Cyprus is a Greek island. How do we move from growing up, and that means at least 20 years of education of that orientation,
Right.
and now my generation, essentially because we're the new grown-ups, we're the active
Yes.
voters, we're going to go in and vote on something.
Correct.
Well, we're called to go in and vote for something that
Hopefully.
will go
Yeah.
against everything
Yes.
that we've been taught, because we do realize and we do understand that the wishful solution of that sort cannot be. The feasible solution means a lot of Turks are going to stay in Cyprus because they've been here for 40 years and they have their families, and there's Cypriots of Turkish origin now that have been born in Cyprus, they have their lives, they have their children. We know that a lot of refugees cannot go home because they are no longer alive and their children are not interested in going back. We know that our land is not going to be ours completely in the sense that we need it. So how are we supposed to balance between the two so conflicting ideas and notions and realities, essentially?
You see, I think you're very right in the sense that what you're saying, aspects of what we mentioned earlier, this change of environment. One very important piece of statistics that I think adds further credence to what you're saying is that back in the Annan Plan referenda, in the Greek Cypriot community, the highest percentage of the no vote was the age group 18 to 25, which was exactly people who were born and raised after 1974. Most of them never crossed to the other side, had never met a Turkish Cypriot, So of course they grew up with a very different reality in their minds, and for them it's very difficult to accept something else, although in principle we would have thought that younger people would be more prone to solutions. The second thing is that also things change because you've seen now in the last election to the Turkish Cypriot community, where Mr. Akinci was elected with nearly 61%. A very large percentage of that was the so-called settlers or non-original Turkish Cypriots who are very frustrated with Turkey and who also feel Cyprus, the land of Cyprus, as their home. So also things are changing there, not in politics anymore, but in perception of all these people. And the third is that unfortunately after 1974, both communities have grown different affiliations, if you like, whereby the Greek Cypriot community, running of course the Republic of Cyprus as such, has turned it more into what the Turkish Cypriots feel is a Hellenic state, and of course the Greek Cypriots feel that the Turkish Cypriots have sort of turned their entity more turning towards Turkey. So one of the challenges is how to forge the Turkish identity that Mr. Akinci, I think, was voted on or run on a card of as the primary identity versus the others who are not going to disappear, but be scaled differently. That is a matter of perception, and it comes from education, it comes from information, so people need to know exactly where things stand, what is being negotiated. Nobody expects them to read perhaps a very long version like the Annan Plan, 150 pages of a very difficult legal text. So this is where political leadership comes in with responsibility to present an accurate view, a condensed but accurate view of where things stand for people to make their choice themselves and not be told what to vote. So it's essentially this two-layer business of convincing the political elites to know what they want, and I'm not quite sure that all of them at all times see eye to eye into this, and then presenting it in a responsible way to the publics to make their choice. Yeah.
I really want to elaborate about the political aspect of the matter, but we're running out of time, and I want to pose a different question. Are the two communities ready to move away from the wishful to the feasible solution? What is your insight based on your work in PRIO?
I'm going to say they'd better be, because realities have changed so much. We're now facing a financial crisis in the Republic of Cyprus. There's a similar financial crisis of a different nature faced by the Turkish Cypriots. You're facing now geopolitical challenges. And Cyprus, let's put it very bluntly, is very small, even together, to deal meaningfully with any larger things. The second is that Cyprus has always been a plateau of contestation for foreign powers, and the more we remain in a conflictual situation, the door is open for more involvement, and that I would be very sad to see coming from either side or both sides, if you like. And the third is that now we're facing common problems, be it migration, be it environmental issues, terrorism, and so on and so forth. We simply cannot afford, I think, to be split in a small place anyway in dealing with such overarching problems.
Thank you so very much for your time and your insight, and thank you for watching.